Hello everyone, welcome back to Call of Duty DFS Slate breakdown for June 1st, the second week of action in the final set of qualifiers. Honestly, first glance, not an interesting slate that much for sure. Might have to do some weird things on this one. Maybe I'm not sure, but we'll look ahead into it and see if anything pops out. But first glance, FaZe minus 240 over Toronto, Minnesota minus 150 versus London, and then Seattle minus 550 versus Boston. Um, I honestly, at first glance, it's really hard to justify any of the underdogs, but we'll go ahead and look and go series by series and see if anything changes our mind. Um, but honestly, it's pretty unexciting to start with. But we'll go ahead and look and see anyway, and we'll go ahead and I don't know, try our best with it. Um, yeah, we'll look. So, Atlanta FaZe is still obviously been playing pretty decently. They got second at the LAN, of course. Um, Overall record was not too great. Coming in, they barely beat the LA Thieves. Um, FaZe have not been playing the best, as you guys could tell. Obviously, their map and series win rate is not ideal. Um, they barely beat the Thieves. Toronto, on the other hand, have really not been playing well. They're pretty up and down as well. Granted, it was close in those losers finals. FaZe took it in five. Honestly, at this point, I am looking at spots to try to fade FaZe in. It's just Toronto does not inspire much confidence either. Like they barely beat LAG and then they lost to London. I think two relatively middling teams. FaZe on the other hand, they barely beat the Thieves in five, which is a pretty middling team in their own right. So overall, honestly, not too exciting. Not very happy with this one. I'm glad we finally get the picks and vetoes here. This is a huge upgrade. I'm so glad we got this change on breaking point, so we can go over the picks and bans a little bit more clearly now. Granted, they're not entirely encased in just our selections. That would be nice. However, it's better than nothing for sure. So we'll take that. So obviously, first glance, FaZe probably going to ban Berlin. That's one of their biggest bans. FaZe or Toronto Ultra are pretty strong on that map, so it'll be make sense for that one to disappear or to get banned from the FaZe side. So that makes sense. Toronto, on the other hand, you are kind of split between Gavutu and then a sprinkle of Bocage and Tuscan bans. I don't think they should necessarily ban Gavutu. It's obviously the one they ban the most, but I don't think they're scared of FaZe on Gavutu necessarily either. So I'm really unsure where Toronto will end up banning. But again, this is the first match of the day, so we will have these released beforehand. As I say in every video, check out the Twitter account at CDL Scrimtel. They release these a little bit beforehand, before the matches come out, so you have some time to adjust. The only one that you get before lock is unfortunately the first series of the day, which is this one, FaZe versus Toronto, I believe. Yeah. So map set, no Berlin. I'm unsure what Toronto will counter with as far as bans go. They're equal record on Bocage, they're equal record on Gavutu, but Atlanta FaZe are slightly worse, I guess, on Tuscan. Toronto are 6-3, Atlanta are 4-3. So I don't know. Maybe Toronto just kind of ban out the Gavutu that they don't like. I'm not sure, but this is definitely going to be one where you want to keep an eye out for sure, because there is a decent chance that we do get a Bocage Tuscan. I wonder what the map set was looking like when they played the most recently. Phase. Let's see. Thieves 3-1 here. 3-0. That's odd. It says 3-1 here, but in here it says 2-3. So maybe I'm going crazy. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is. It's interesting, but yeah, it was the Bocage Tuscan, and both of those maps ended up going towards the phase side. Celium and Arcides ended up doing most of the work. Simp didn't do that great. So overall, I think this series is pretty close. I'm kind of surprised the odds are this kind of like one-sided, if I'm honest. I think FaZe's still getting a lot of credit and like kind of name recognition. They have not been playing great, and it's easily apparent by their stats so far. Their map win rate is only 27 and 21. They're dropping a good bit of maps, and similarly, both of these teams, both of these teams are relatively strong in the search and destroys. As you guys can see, FaZe are 11 and 5, and then Toronto is 13 and 5. However, the difference I think does come down to these respawns, where Toronto is actually 14 and 9 in the hardpoint, and then 6 and 7 in control. FaZe are 6 and 6 in control, only 10 and 10 in hardpoint. So the hardpoints have actually been going a little bit better for Toronto over this last little period here. And that's just that's pretty interesting to me, especially if we were to look specifically online. I think these numbers would be exacerbated even more towards the Toronto side. Yeah, FaZe, they're 4 and 6 in hardpoint online. Toronto's 8 and 5 in hardpoint online. Granted, the search and destroys will probably be FaZe favored either way, but I think this is a pretty close one, and all things considered, I'm very surprised by these odds. I think they maybe are a little bit heavy, or sorry, not heavy. I think they're a little bit tilted in the FaZe side, maybe because of Toronto's recent games, because they lost to London, who I think is perceived as a pretty low-end team at the moment, although I think they're a little bit underrated in their own right. I just think FaZe are getting a little bit too much recognition here, a little bit too much credit. And like I said, I think the map set is potentially really, really strong. And I think you're getting a pretty cheap Toronto pieces. So that's going to be my first one today. At first glance, I wasn't thinking much about this one, but as I looked into these stats a little bit more, that kind of changed my tune a little bit. I do think this is a pretty decent spot for Toronto. I think it's probably going to be pretty close. I think it probably will go 5. I think you could easily see FaZe winning this one out in the 5th map, and they do win these search and destroys. However, we're not playing the DFS aspect for those search and destroys because they matter so little for DFS. You really want your players to perform well in these hard points, in these controls where the kills and deaths matter a lot more. An average search and destroy game, you could probably get like 6 or 7 kills, but in the average hard point, you're looking at like a 25 or something, along those lines. So, I'd be looking at Toronto. Their submachine guns, although their numbers have not been great lately, they're viable. We've seen Kleenex have incredibly high performance games, although rather rarely. I wouldn't be scared of them at all here. Again, I just think FaZe is a little bit overrated. I think this is going to be a pretty close match between two pretty decent teams. And I'm just going to slightly lean towards the Toronto side, although I don't love the money line quite as much. I think this plus 1.5. Actually, I thought this was plus money when I first saw it, but plus 1.5 at minus 110. I don't like paying the juice on that. So I'll probably not leaning towards many bets, but I think this is a pretty solid DFS option. And again, make sure you guys keep a lookout for those maps. I'd lock and load Toronto and maybe even FaZe also, maybe not in the same lineup. I'm not sure. We'll have to look at the map set for the rest of these teams before we consider a game stack, which I do think is viable when you do have the best maps of Bocage and Tuscan. In a hypothetical scenario where we have FaZe and Toronto playing Bocage and Tuscan, and then we have no other Bocage in the rest of the day, I think that could lend itself to being a really, really, really good scenario for both teams on both sides to end up scoring pretty well. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm willing to go with Toronto here, but I don't want to kind of eliminate the FaZe side as well. I think Celium at 9K and Arcides at 7.2 specifically. Those two have been playing relatively well lately, especially Celium. I do believe he's still the number 1 player in the league, both statistically and kind of just outright as well. So that's the direction I'm headed. I like Toronto. Obviously, we'll look at the players towards the end as we typically do, but Cammy and Zai have been playing really well. Kleenex and Bance are inconsistent, but I mean, at that price tag, you're just kind of hoping for a decent performance from them, and obviously Celium. I think Arceus would be the phase ones as well. But I think all 8 players are viable in this series. It just depends on kind of how you're building your lineups, how you want to think about it, and kind of with the story that you're kind of telling with that lineup. The next one up is London versus Minnesota. Pretty interesting one at first glance. So we know Minnesota had their, I believe, 6-game online win streak brought to an end by Florida in a pretty dominant 3-0 fashion last time out as well. So if we look, I think we're just going to go ahead and look at maybe just the online stats for now. I do think that matters a lot, for the context of the scenario that we're in of online Call of Duty. At first glance, you're definitely probably going to look and see that, Minnesota is 6-1, London is 2-4, the map record is 18-7. Meanwhile, London is 8-15. The numbers are definitely heavily in favor of Minnesota, and I do think that can tell you a story. But I think again, we have London now returning with their full roster. They have Gizmo returning instead of Harry coming in, and I do think that does change the dynamic of this team. Although Gizmo didn't necessarily perform that well last match, personally, but they did end up getting the decent upset behind a really big performance from Zero. I don't think this is necessarily replicable, although I do think Zero is a pretty solid player. I do think he is probably the worst individually skilled player on London when we're talking again in a vacuum of DFS aspect. So I don't think this is a replicable scenario for London to go ahead and win the series. Then again, I think you could argue if London beat Toronto without that much help from Afro and Gizmo, who are arguably their 2 best players, that they could be looking a little bit more dangerous here. And that's I think is why we do see this price be so close. I'm honestly very unsure where people will end up landing on this one. If I had a better pulse or like a better touch on the pulse of the people and kind of see where people were going and people were thinking of this one, I could definitely justify going with either side on this one. For some reason, my heart or my initial instinct is that people are going to look and see that London's, recent stats and everything have not been great. And I do think people are going to look and see that Minnesota's numbers have been really, really strong lately as well. And they're going to look and see that Minnesota's only a small favorite here and go that way. So I do think there could potentially be really solid leverage on the London side for that reason. But I don't know. It's really tough in this one because I am one of those people who I just alluded to, kind of who will look at these stats, say Minnesota's playing extremely well. They're a really, really confident, really, really good team at the moment. And they're only a slight favorite over a team that's played 1 series together. It's a little weird to try to go anywhere but Minnesota here. I'm honestly not sure where I'm leaning. I don't know if how people are going to like overreact and say, oh, London beat Toronto and Minnesota lost to Florida 3-0. Maybe they're a little bit better and the tides are turning. I'm not sure. I really don't know where people are going. This would definitely be one where I'd try to look out for, kind of see where a lot of people are leaning, and then I'd just go the other way. I think that makes a lot of sense here. Statistically speaking, I think you could get some pretty nice price tags for the London boys. I think Afro at 6'4" is just strictly underpriced. Gizmo at 8'2". I think you could argue both these Minnesota boys of Priest and Havoc are underpriced. Attach at 9'2" is a fairly fair price tag for him. So there's a lot of ways you could go with this one. I'm honestly unsure, but I think the main point here is the map picks. And London don't play Bocage, and that's mainly the problem here. Minnesota's bans are usually across the board, so I'm not sure what they'll do. But London will London will ban Bocage here. I can't imagine they do anything else. And then I'm unsure where they will go regardless, or where Minnesota will go as far as bans. So London will ban Bocage. Minnesota's I think fine on everything else. So I'm not sure what Minnesota will end up taking out of the map pool here. I could see them banning or picking pretty much any of these other maps. I I guess statistically they've been banning either the Gavutu or the Tuscan, but neither of those maps I think are particularly wanted by London, maybe outside of the Gavutu. So I think we could definitely end up with like a Berlin Tuscan or Gavutu Berlin, Gavutu Tuscan. I'm not sure, but the main point is that Bocage is going to be probably left out of this one, which definitely hinders the upside, I think, of both of these sides for sure. But I'm honestly unsure where to go with this one. I really, really am. Because, like I said, at first glance, you have to feel like minus 150 Minnesota feels a little disrespectful of how well they've been playing. And I don't know if I want to, be the slick person and try to go with London because they maybe they're low owned and that kind of thing, or if you just want to go with Minnesota and say, you know what, everything's telling me Minnesota should win this. You should just go with that side, kind of either way. I'm not sure. I really, really am unsure with this one because we've only have one game sample from London. I just don't know if they're overreacting to this too quickly or what it is, but I feel like Minnesota's been consistently better, and London, although, they get their full roster back, I don't know if it matters that much. The reason I bring that up is because it looks like, I guess they were actually playing pretty well beforehand. They were 4-1 in Major 1 qualifiers, and Major 2 qualifiers, they were 4-1 as well, so I'm really unsure. I'm really, really unsure how good London is. Like, if we were to expand this and look at just online play where they have their full roster, Major 2 qualifiers, Major 1 qualifiers, their numbers get much, much better. So, it's just all over the place here. Again, maybe I think, in the third match, I'm going to have a hard time getting away from the favorite. So I'm willing to go with the second underdog pick here in London. Again, this one is not feeling great. I feel very, very torn on this one. For Atlanta face Toronto Ultra, I do think, while I was a little torn, I feel a little bit better with Toronto than I do with, say, London versus Minnesota here. Again, the numbers just tell you one thing and your heart kind of tells you another thing here. I guess it depends what numbers you look at, really. Like I just went over, with their full roster, they've actually been a pretty good team. So I don't know. Again, this is one where I could see it being very close. I think both sides are relatively viable. However, I'm probably just going to go with the London side, but not too heavy in this one. I'm not loving the outlook of the maps. I'm not loving the outlook of the series. I think it's a close series on bad maps. And I think that's kind of like the worst recipe when it comes to DK performances. But and with that scenario, I'll go with who I think is going to be lower owned and who I think is cheap with the London side. As far as players, I'm really unsure. We'll have to look at that in a little bit. But again, I mean, Afro at 6'4" pops out, but I don't know if you want to buy into Zero or Gizmo maybe. I'm not sure. We'll look at that in a little bit. But I'll go with London here in the second series as well. And then it comes out to the third one. I think this is going to be pretty straightforward for myself and most people. We do have Boston, who took out Optic Texas and then got swept up here by the LA Thieves in their next one out. Then meanwhile you have Seattle Surge, who is on a what is that, 6-10 series win streak here. Nope, 9 series. Looks like 4 plus 4 plus 1. Yep, 9 series win streak for Seattle. Again, there is a little concern there with Seattle because they typically they're pretty inconsistent and they're definitely up and down across the board. But mainly what it comes down to is their complete dominance in these respawn game modes. And then also the other thing is their map set is pretty good. They typically ban out Gavutu and they like to pick the Bocage and the Tuscan, which are the two best maps that we like to see. I'm not sure if Boston will like to go to Bocage. It's typically their ban is they typically like to ban Bocage, so I'm not sure. I don't love the Bocage outlook here, but I think either way, Seattle will ban Gavutu, and I'm fine with getting Berlin Tuscan if that's the case. I think Seattle will be fine on those maps as well. Their players are just very individually talented across the board, so I'm definitely fine going with that. And then another thing as well, I mean, obviously Sib and Pred's numbers are crazy, but remember Although Mac's numbers overall look pretty good, when you do add the LAN environment, he's a much better player on LAN versus online, and we are online here. So Mac would be the Seattle player I'm looking to get the least part of. Statistically speaking, he's been their worst, and that's something I would try to avoid either way. So I'm liking the Seattle side. It's really hard to justify anything else. Statistically speaking, form watching wise, but I personally just kind of can't shake the early inconsistencies that we had with Seattle. It felt like during the Major 2 qualifiers and even the Major 1 qualifiers, they would look great one week and really bad the next, and they're kind of up and down. So I'm going pretty heavy on Seattle here, but I'm going to be prepared for the worst if I'm honest. So that'll be it there, but I don't think there's a ton to break down. Again, Bocage, pretty unlikely. I think the most likely scenario is Seattle will ban Gavutu. I could say that with pretty, almost certainty. And if that's the case, then Boston, I think, probably will ban Bocage. I'd imagine that would be the one they go to. And that leaves us with Berlin and Tuscan, which is the second and third best maps for trying to target. So I'm fine with going with the Seattle pretty heavily on Berlin and Tuscan. I think that's perfectly fine for them as well. So now that we kind of have an idea of the teams we like to target, let's go ahead and look at them as well. I mean, Sib and Pred are pretty expensive, but accuracy at 7.8 is a fine third piece as well. But that's kind of why I think I'm leaning a little bit more towards the London side and the Toronto side as well, because I do think jamming in Seattle will be that important. So if we look at, I think we're just going to continue to look at just the online play again. I do think it matters that much comparing online to LAN. I think the numbers that we've seen from some of these players, just, it's a little bit too much to avoid. So we'll look at sheerly online play here. So we'll go with Seattle, Toronto, and I think we'll go with London as well. But again, I think London's numbers are going to be pretty poor because they've, been playing with a different player, and they've just been playing a lot worse overall. So that's something to keep in mind. Obviously, two that stand out, right at the bat are Sib and Pred. They've been really, really, really strong individual players. I'd be looking to get those two in a bunch of my lineups, almost 100% maybe, for sure. Then mixing in players like Insight, Accuracy. If you do want to do a Seattle 3-man, Insight and Cammy, and then Zero as a 1.01. Afro, probably look to avoid Mac. Harry's not playing, so we can exclude him. But I mean, the numbers for the London boys are going to be pretty low, so you may have to, kind of boost them up a little bit in your mind if you do want to try to get them. I mean, Afro is the cheapest one, but if we were to look at him, like London individually, Afro and Zero have been a lot better. I mean, this is just one series from Gizmo, so it was his first one back. So I think you could bump him up a little bit. Nasty would be the one I'd leave out, but I think ideally, I guess it would be Afro and then either Zero or Gizmo. But I think you could argue any two of these three are fine for London. But again, no Bocage. I think the Bocage chance is pretty likely in the first series. I think the maps are fine in the second or in the third series. I don't love the map outlook in the second series, so this would be the one I'd probably go the least on. Just an idea of a lineup in my head that I'm forming is if you have like Sib and Pred, and then you just have a one-off of London, and then you go with like Cammy and Insight. I don't know if that's possible. Probably not at those price tags, but hypothetically, something like that makes sense. Just trying to get a good chunk of the Seattle side, a good chunk of the Toronto side, and then maybe just some filler pieces with the London side. I think will do you fine for this one. So for the Toronto side, I'm pretty intrigued with this one. Again, I think Bance and Kleenex, they've been playing pretty poorly lately. I want to go look and see like if when they win, who's doing well. Let's see, Toronto 3-1 here, 3-0 here, 3-0 here, 3-1 here. So let's just look and see who's doing well when they win. Looks like Cammy just was the only one here. That's pretty interesting. It was Insight and Cammy here. Kleenex's number, I mean, he has a lot of kills here, so that's a pretty good one there. Right here was Insight and Cammy. Over here was Cammy and Kleenex. Then looks like that's it here. Well, 3-1 here. 3-0 here. Can maybe look at this 3-2 here. Maybe look at this 3-2 here. Okay, so we'll look here again. Insight Cammy, maybe Kleenex. Cammy, maybe Kleenex. I mean, the Kleenex's kills are just so high that his kill death ratio doesn't necessarily need to be the best, because his overall amount of kills is pretty high. This one, it was Scrappy, so this one wasn't even with their full team. And then this one again was Cammy and Insight. So I think it's pretty heavily condensed there between Cammy, Insight, and then maybe Kleenex if you want to go down there. I can't really justify Bances based off of kind of what we just saw from them. So yeah, I think overall that'll leave kind of what I'm looking at. So that'll be it from me today. Yeah, I think overall, kind of came into this one a little bit unexcited. I didn't expect me to be picking these underdogs, but I think, kind of looked at the stats maybe and kind of came around on them. So, yeah, I'm pretty intrigued. I definitely like Seattle and I like Toronto a bunch. That middle series, Minnesota and London, I don't feel the best about. I could definitely see myself just kind of fading that one altogether. Or maybe just going sprinkle with it because, like I said, I do think on both sides, I think Havoc, Priesta, Zero, Afro, Attach, those are all fine plays, I think, at their price. So, maybe I can mix and match a little bit of both. I'm not sure, but I'm not loving the overall state of that series, but I think Seattle, a pretty good spot. FaZe and Toronto Ultra are in good spots, especially in map-wise. So, that'll be it from me today. I'm pretty excited for the slate, actually. Maybe get a little bit unique, and then keep an eye out. I don't think there's going to be there will not be Bocage in London, Minnesota, and it's probably unlikely you get Bocage in Boston, Seattle. So keep an eye out. Again, check Twitter at CDL Scrimtel. They usually put out the map sets about 15 to 30 minutes before lock for the first match of the day. And if we do have a Bocage and Tuscan, I could definitely see myself putting together a game stack lineup of Atlanta FaZe and Toronto Ultra. And if that's the case, then I am fine with going like Celium, Insight, Cammy, Kleenex, and then Simp maybe, or RCDs. I'm not sure. But I think you could definitely combine teams, or you could definitely game stack that scenario. And I do think if it does go 5, and if we do get close maps back and forth, that we can see a pretty decent scoring output from both sides in that series. So it's a possibility. Keep an eye out for that for sure. And I do think that is a viable option, especially in a big contest where people rarely stack at all. So, keep in mind, maybe you could even attack it with like a mini stack. You could do just Celium and Insight and call it a day. Maybe Celium, Insight, Cammy or something like that. I think that'd be a pretty cheap stack overall. 9, 8, 4, and Kleenex at 6.8. I mean, I meant Celium, Cammy, or Celium, Insight, and Kleenex. So 9, 8, 4, and 6, 8. That's a pretty cheap one. A pretty unique stack, I think, as well. You can include. You don't have to go full crazy with a 3-2 stack again. You could get like a 2-1, or you could even do 1-1. Like if you did Celium and Insight, I think that's very viable as well. So don't be too afraid to get a little bit unique when you are going with the chalk, I think, of Seattle. So that'll be it from me tonight. I'll see you guys again tomorrow, probably around the same time for the same stuff. And I will see you guys then. Thank you.